Born out of the need to break the bitter stalemate of World War I, the tank re-energized the battlefield, and its importance in military planning soared. The mission of the tank also expanded beyond breaking through enemy defences, and began to include capturing and holding land. This led to the development of some truly mammoth tank designs that were intended to be the be-all and end-all of battlefield weapons. And here are 5 of the biggest and scariest tanks ever built, number 1 being the most intimidating machine of World War II. This video is sponsored appropriately by Armada Modern Tanks, a large-scale multiplayer 3D online tank game that lets you command tanks into battle and play with friends and people around the world for free, with the option of in-game purchases. You can upgrade your tank and become stronger, faster and deadlier, and then face your friends in cross-platform PvP blitz battles of 5v5. There are various combat modes, the graphics are awesome, with a ton of detail going into the environment, as well as the realistic physics of breaking through walls and trees falling, and there are many daily quests and bonuses to keep you busy. With loads of world arenas, intuitive controls that will be appreciated by novice and hardcore gamers. It's a great multi-platform game, available on Windows, Android and iOS, so you can play on the go. And with almost 100,000 reviews on the Play Store, it's a game that's well proved itself. Start your own battle by clicking on the link in the description to install Armada now, and you'll receive a huge bonus. Not only are you helping Top 5s create these videos by doing so, but you'll also get 100 gold, 100,000 silver, and a VIP account. Char 2C. The French saw the first British tanks and were immediately impressed, thus their leadership demanded their own machines. The first French tank, the Schneider CA1, had a poor start to the war, but later tanks, such as the Renault FT, was both revolutionary and successful. Learning from these experiences, the French began work on a new type that would be built in 3 distinct classes, each heavier than the last, culminating in a 69-ton vehicle known as the Char 2C. The project met heavy political resistance, delaying it and resulting in the cancellation of the 2 smaller models, until only the 69-ton Char 2C was left. 10 were built, entering service in 1921, and these were truly gargantuan machines, standing at nearly 13.5 feet tall and 33.8 feet long. Compare this to the US Army's current tank, the M1A2 Abrams, which stands at just 8 feet tall and 26 feet long. The tank had a crew of 12, including 3 in the turret, who aimed and fired the 75mm gun. Another turret was at the rear, housing a Hotchkiss machine gun, while 3 more machine guns were located on the sides and the front of the hull. Armour was thick for the time, but this advantage would deteriorate as tanks became better armed in the 1930s. Some of the 10 tanks were modified over time to trial new weapons and armour, but by the time war broke out again in 1939, they were hopelessly outclassed by newer German anti-tank guns. They did however create an excellent impression on the French public, and were used in morale-boosting propaganda, where they appeared to be invulnerable mobile fortresses. The truth was far from it, however, and all but one would be destroyed by the French as defeat neared. The survivor was taken back to Germany as a war trophy, where it disappeared in the chaos of the end of the Third Reich. Tiger II. Germany's tank forces were a mixed bag in the late 1930s, consisting of mainly lighter vehicles and a few medium types, and their success in 1939 and 1940 was thanks largely to superior tactics. However, German engineers were working on newer types that would unquestionably dominate the battlefield as early as 1937, resulting in the Tiger I, which entered the fray in 1942. This spectacular vehicle, with its heavy armour and 88mm gun, outperformed virtually every Allied tank at the time, and remained a significant threat until the end of the war. But the Germans were not satisfied with this success and began work on the Tiger II, an even better protected version, which could take on superior numbers of the enemy's best tanks with confidence. A consequence of this was a significantly increased size and weight, being just under 70 tons. Known as the King Tiger to the Allies, the new tank entered service in late 1944, and its impact was immediately felt. but while it could destroy nearly everything it encountered, it was extremely cumbersome and slow. In the fast-moving battlefield, it was actually left behind by the main force on several occasions, allowing it to be overwhelmed or destroyed by air power. But when it was expected to hold territory, it was a truly lethal obstacle to the Allies. It may not be the largest tank on this list, nor the most heavily armed or protected, but without doubt, it had the greatest impact on the battlefield. The TOG 1 and 2. When war with Germany loomed again in the late 1930s, the Western Allies anticipated another great static conflict across the fields of Europe. In July 1939, the British set up the Special Vehicle Committee. That included many of those who designed the original Mark I tank to conceive of new tanks to breach enemy trenches and fortifications, and this resulted in the 80-ton TOG 1. TOG meaning the old gang, in reference to the veteran tank designers. The older thinking in tank design was obvious. The track ran the entire circumference of the hull, and it could reach just 8.7 miles per hour, while it carried its main 75mm gun in the forward hull. Although a turret was located on top with a 2-pounder gun, it was more heavily armoured than most British and German tanks of their period, however. The secondary prototype was redesigned with a reduced track diameter that no longer ran over the top of the tank, and a few other minor changes, becoming the TOG 2. Unfortunately for the project, the fighting in the Second World War was anything but static, and it was thanks to the smaller, medium tanks working in conjunction with air and artillery support, breaking quickly through defensive lines and capturing objectives. Work soon slowed on the TOG tanks and ceased altogether in 1943. The TOG 1 was scrapped, but the TOG 2 can be seen today at the Bovington Tank Museum. T-28 Super Heavy Tank. As the French constructed the Maginot Line during the 1930s to protect them from Nazi Germany, Hitler ordered that his forces should do the same in case the Maginot Line emboldened the French to attack first. Dubbed the West Wall by the Germans, it was known as the Siegfried Line, and over time became an extremely dense network of fortifications and tank obstacles. As the Allies planned the invasion of Europe, it became clear that after liberating France, they would have to face this immense defensive barrier, and this led to proposals to develop a new tank specifically to breach it. The US Army and Ordnance Departments met in March 1944 to finalise the tank design, which was then given to the Pacific Car and Foundry Company to manufacture. The resulting T-28 Super Heavy tank was a Goliath of a vehicle, weighing in at 86 tons. It featured a distinctive double set of tracks on either side of the hull, was armed with a 105mm gun, when regular US tanks had a 75mm gun, and was exceptionally heavily armoured to withstand persistent enemy fire. The downsides of all of this was that the gun had to be mounted in the hull, meaning the tank had to turn to aim it, and its mobility was appalling, being able to reach just 8 miles per hour. Nevertheless, it could have proven useful in breaching the Siegfried Line, had the Allies not already done so by the time testing was complete. It was then planned to be used to storm the Japanese home islands, but the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki put an end to that goal. Only 2 vehicles were ever completed before the project was deemed obsolete and abandoned. The Panzer VIII Maus. During World War II, the Germans were far more enthusiastic about super heavy tanks than their Allied counterparts. By 1943, they were becoming increasingly outnumbered on the battlefield, and super heavy tanks seemed to be the answer, since they could in theory destroy large numbers of smaller and less armoured vehicles, and break through enemy lines to achieve strategic goals. One of the German proponents of these tanks was Ferdinand Porsche, who would later become famous for his sports cars. He conceived of a tank mounting a 128mm gun in a rotating turret that could outrange and destroy any Allied tank then in service. The tank would also be exceptionally heavily armoured, to such an extent that it would be almost invulnerable to enemy tank formations many times its number. Originally called the Mammoth or Mammoth, it eventually received the name Maus. Although weighing in as a colossal 180 tons, it was anything but small. In fact, it remains the heaviest armoured fighting vehicle of all time, although this made it too heavy to cross many of Europe's bridges, which would cause serious problems when it came to deploying it to the front. As a result, it was designed to ford rivers, with the crew being fed oxygen via a long snorkel. Armour on the Mouse was over twice as thick as on the earlier Tiger I tank, which was already greatly feared by Allied tank crews, and as well as the 128mm gun, it also featured an additional 75mm gun. The first prototype, minus the turret, was completed in December 1943, and the second with a turret and new engine in June 1944. Testing was extensively carried out at the Boblingen test facility, the results of which were considered generally satisfactory, although the first prototype had suspension issues while the second had reliability problems with the engines. It was understandably even more awkward than the King Tiger to manoeuvre, and was only half as fast. Work continued on several other prototypes before the war took its toll on the project, and they were cancelled before being destroyed to prevent their capture by the Soviets. The two working prototypes were ordered to assist in the defence of Wunsdorf, but were subsequently damaged by explosive charges placed on them by the Germans, when they had to abandon them. The Soviets recovered the wrecks and salvaged the turrets from the second vehicle to fit on the first prototype for a series of trials in 1946. Afterwards, the hybrid tank was put on display at the Kubinka Museum, where it remains today. There have been stories that a third Mouse was completed and fought in action against American M18 Hellcats, where it was destroyed and then buried, but this has never been confirmed. Just how effective the Mouse would have been in combat has long been the subject of debate amongst military historians, but it cannot be denied that it was a truly amazing piece of military engineering. So that's 5 of the biggest and scariest tanks ever built, truly terrifying machines. Don't forget to check out this video's sponsor, Armada Modern Tanks, by clicking on the link in the description, and I'll see you in the next video.